Can everybody hear me if I just talk like this? Is this all right? Great. My name's Robert Bell. I have the privilege of serving as the executive director of two associations in our industry, the World Teleport Association, of which Globecomm is a proud member, and the Society of Satellite Professionals International, of which Globecomm is a proud sponsor. So now you know why I'm here. I've been running back and forth between the sessions all day, and the reason I've been doing that was beautifully captured by Steve Spryzer, who led the tour that I was on of the wireless and media centers here at Globecomm. And he said, we went into the broadcast lab, and he said, we're really thinking at this point that the direction that the media business is going and the direction that the mobile business is going, it's all going to be the same stuff in a couple of years. And that's, I think, become a commonly accepted wisdom. But I was interested in hearing somebody from a company like this say it, because that means it's not just a wish. It means they see the path of convergence. So we have here before us, we have the experts who've been speaking to you all day. What I want to do in the next 30 minutes is to ask them 3 or 4 big questions about that convergence, about what mobile and media increasingly have to do with each other and how those markets are shifting. And once I ask that question, we'll pass this down. You don't all have to talk, because if you do, we'll be here until until there'll be time for Monday Night Football. But if you've got something to say, please just jump into this. The first question I have has to do with, again, these are thematic questions. We have got a lot of devices, 50 billion devices we're going to hear about very shortly. How do you think that the media market, the media and entertainment business, and also the mobility business, as represented by rural carriers as well as some large carriers, is going to be affected in the future by the utter ubiquity of these smart devices, whether they're smartphones, whether they're tablets? What's the big impact of just there being so many of these damn things out there, used for so many things in people's lives, in the media business and increasingly in the mobile business? How is it going to be shaped? Who wants to jump into that?
Well, you see that now from a media standpoint with what's being delivered, say, your Verizon phone with ESPN. So you've got media that's being pushed to your mobility device. But I think when you talk about 50 million devices, not all of those will be doing the same thing. So it isn't going to be one device. Some of them are going to be very simplistic devices, and maybe even the large part, even from the standpoint of pacemakers going in, when people have to call in and do their reports for pacemakers, those are going to be mobility devices that are going to come forward. So media and mobility will be converged, but it's not going to be simply one device that it's offered on.
I think it's going to be just one big mass marketing campaign with location-based services.
One big mass marketing campaign for location-based services.
I do.
Can you talk about that?
I do. I think that when all your kids have these devices, I think when they go to Disney, or if you're single and you're in a dating club, or if you're a sports fan, or if you're a size 5 and you're in the mall, I think those location-based services are going to reach out. The media is going to be marketing to you 100% of the time if you let them on your device. Doesn't matter what kind of device you have. I mean, there's some really good uses for location-based services in terms of safety and stuff, but I think mass marketing and sales, like you get those broadcast emails today, you're going to get them on your phones and your devices, and people are going to be looking for you to market whatever their products and services depending on where you are. That's what I think is going to happen.
I think writing on top of your statement, I think that we can't talk about media and mobility convergence without talking about social. So when you're looking at the evolution of mobile and media, you're talking about social, mobility, and location-based. And with that comes the dynamic of new media and a content that's being produced not just by the traditional content producers, but the content producers that we all are as consumers. And I think that we should take a grain of salt on the 50 billion connected devices as well, maybe talk about 7 billion consumer-oriented devices that may manipulate media in some way, shape, or form or another. And the biggest challenge that I see is the shock to the system that's putting on networks, and how we're going to prepare for that tsunami, because we're struggling today. We struggled with the promise of 3G. We're seeing headline speeds of around 10 meg or 16 meg for long-term evolution. But those are headline speeds. And it's okay now when you only have a few LTE devices connected to a network. It's going to be a hell of a lot different when you have millions of devices connected on an LTE network. Are we still going to be able to sustain those bandwidths, especially with the use cases that we're seeing? I don't know if you've experienced it today, but a Foursquare check-in is actually quite painful. And it's only a couple of kilobytes of data, let alone when you start integrating Foursquare with video-based advertisement, for example. You're going to start looking at a whole new level of bandwidth consumption. So it's not just about the connected devices, it's about the bandwidth utilized per connected device. And let's venture to say that it's 7 billion, and they're all consuming steady streams of around 1 or 2 meg simultaneously, maybe in 10 years' time. That's what's freaking me out, which is, how do we prepare for that onslaught?
All right, so peer-to-peer could make that network problem that you've just described infinitely worse.
Well, think about what happens when iCloud gets turned on pretty soon. You got 25 million iPads out there. Every one of those iPad owners has an iPhone, probably has a iMac, AirBook, and they're all synced together. You take a picture, goes up, stays there for 30 days, comes down to all those other machines. Think about the bandwidth up and down on top of that. And Steve Jobs said this is going to change the way computing is going to happen. This, services in the cloud, mobile devices. The iPad didn't exist more than, two years ago. And we're at that steep part of the curve now with Moore's Law accelerating and CPU horsepower coming out, file-based content, and all the content you're talking about is going to put a hell of a stress on networks. And that cloud services is going to change the world. And we're only like 2 years into this thing. So it's going to be an interesting next 10 years.
Let's talk about the money, because usually if you follow the money, you follow the path of least resistance. Okay, so we've talked about the network stress. We've talked about a number of changes that might have come out here. How are we ultimately going to monetize this? What are some of the ways that those smart device services, whether for television, whether for feature films, whether for reality shows, or for basic data services, Foursquare, whatever, what are some of the ways that those are going to be monetized in both the media and the wireless worlds? And most important of all, who gets to cash the check? Who makes the money? How do they make money, but who makes the money in this brave new world? Opinions, gentlemen. Gosh, they're all men, too. Isn't that really frightening? Anyway, okay.
I just want to make 2 comments. One on the last question. It's changed the social structure of the world already. If you have 4 or 5 teenage people, women, guys, sitting in a place, they no longer talk to each other. They text each other. If you're driving somewhere, they could be in the same car. They're not talking to each other. They're texting each other. It's changed the social structure and will continue to change the social structure. In terms of monetizing it, the owners of bandwidth, and that's what the fight is all about with the FCC, the owners of bandwidth will be the people who make money because that's what you're selling. The content in of itself, unless you have certain high dollar volume assets like motion pictures, it's not about the asset anymore. It's about the bandwidth. They don't care what's on it. They're just consuming it. And so people are willing to pay for bandwidth. I'm not sure they're willing to pay for content any longer.
Does anybody want to argue with that?
Well, I'm going to have to start with I don't necessarily agree. And then follow
But
that
he
up.
respects your right to your opinion.
No, I mean,
Yeah, I'll text you.
on one of my 4 devices. No, you're absolutely right. I think it's more of a sort of, I think the term that's being used is a 2-sided business model, where you have on the one hand the service provider, whether they're a cable co or an AT&T, where there is going to be money to be made on bandwidth provisioning, quality of service, and assuring an adequate level of provisioning to deliver on the value-added applications that are being built on those networks. So if you look at, for example, Netflix recently with its move to the cloud, or Amazon, or Google, or Facebook for that matter, I wouldn't start to say that there is no value being placed on that content. I think that they have proven in their business models that there's a lot of value being placed on that content. I think what needs to happen, though, is an emergence of flows of income happening from the application providers to the bandwidth providers, and from the bandwidth providers potentially to the application providers in terms of leveraging the content that is being produced?
One of my daughter's friends has the single most watched, viewed, cartoon on YouTube. He makes $0 on it. Nobody pays for the content. He has more hits than anybody else in the universe. People are consuming bandwidth like crazy to watch it, but nobody's making any money except the bandwidth providers.
So I'll build on Cheyenne's comments. And when we look at machine to machine, or we look at the commoditization or the monetization of the network, I could think of a couple of examples where we as consumers actually are paying for the network bandwidth or network research, or we just don't know it. When you think about the Kindle example, when you buy a book, there's certainly a component in there that gets paid to the network operator for access to the 3G network. I could see this getting extended into a variety of applications. I know there's car companies that are putting connectivity devices in their vehicles, and once they have the connectivity in the vehicle, they don't want to sell that service once for a GPS system or once for a safety system. They want to sell it for restaurant rating, location-based services, any variety of applications. And I think we as consumers we're gonna pay for that application. We might pay it in the form of an extra 50 cents at dinner or an extra 25 cents when we go to rent a movie. But I think there's going to be innovation around how money is made, as well as there's innovation in the network itself as far as how the traffic flows.
I'm just going to represent the absolute contrarian view to you, sir. I just did a study, interviewed about 20 or 30 people in various walks of life in content distribution, and they pretty much were unanimous on the idea that the ones who are going to win are the content owners. Because it's all very well to say that he doesn't make any money from his YouTube video. That's because YouTube hasn't figured out their model yet. But for people who've been in the media business for a while, it all ends up flowing to the guy who owns the rights.
Except China.
Except China. And China, and that will continue until China's got enough intellectual property that they need to protect it, and then instantly that will change. It'll be amazing. It'll be amazing. So that's the other point of view on that. Okay, another question for you. One of the things I heard, actually I heard two things today. One was that we've already got all the tech tools we need. Therefore, it's the business model that has to catch up. But I thought, which is true in a way, but I thought the more persuasive point was that in both media and mobile, the market is changing so fast, it is evolving so fast that it's completely outpacing our ability to keep up with it. And I think this was actually a point that you made very eloquently. Can you just, from your own work, provide some examples of those kind of the challenges that fast evolution in the marketplace is having on those of us who have to make the technology work?
I don't know if I have the answer, but I can tell you that AT&T and Verizon both gave up their all-you-can-eat plans. And the reason they did that is because they were just swamped. I mean, those networks are they're just totally swamped. And the fact that Sprint's going to that today, is just a ploy really to try and swing some of that business over. And at some point when that network loads up, this 4G LTE business is, it's a very cool technology, but I can assure you that the towers are going to have to get a lot closer to the people. There's just a huge amount of opportunity for people in here to build more stuff and try and find more site access, because the higher the bandwidth, the shorter the distance it is, I think. Pretty much, right? So I think AT&T and Verizon are the greatest examples of the all-you-can-eat plan. They just had to turn it off. I mean, those kids are just streaming video 24/7, and they're just clogging that network.
I don't know about the rest of you, but for me, the world has been going faster and faster, especially in the internet streaming world. I remember several years ago, Dave Hirschberg, our founder, said that all of television is going to be going over the internet, and I argued vehemently with him that wasn't going to happen. There were bandwidth issues. Who was going to watch a little piece of square this big that kept stopping and buffering? It wasn't going to happen, but things have changed so rapidly just within the last year or year and a half. You had progressive downloading, now we got adaptive downloading. I don't know what it's going to be next week, but just as an engineer trying to keep up with all this, it's almost impossible. And then, I mean, we get involved with not only the satellite aspects of it, where we go from MPEG-2 to MPEG-4, DVB-S2, S to DVB-S2, the terrestrial world, DVB-T to DVB-T2. Now this year at IBC, there's a DVB-T2 Lite for mobile. And just trying to keep up with all this technology is mind-boggling. I mean, especially for somebody like me who started out in the analog world where AT&T never changed anything for 35 years. And then now with the digital world, everything changing daily, it's a whole new world.
Hi, I work for QVC, and we just recently built a media asset management system. And in order to control scope, we rolled that system out to 200 desktops within the corporation. It's been in production since April. And and the whole idea was to create a tapeless workflow. Just in the last 6 months, I've been completely overwhelmed with requests to get video on desktops. People now realize